Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org. I am Laura Carfang, breast cancer survivor and founder of survivingbreastcancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Breast Cancer Conversations. I am so glad you are here. If this is your first time joining us, a huge welcome to you. I'm so glad you found our podcast. And if you are an avid listener and tune in each week, I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart because you keep me motivated and excited to record week after week, knowing that you guys are listening and helping to put breast cancer conversations in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. So thank you. Before we dive into today's podcast, I want to give a quick shout out to all of the free programs and virtual services that we offer through our nonprofit survivingbreastcancer.org. So if you are new to us, hop on over to survivingbreastcancer.org for more information. And you can check out our events calendar where we have weekly support groups. We do expressive writing. We do creative art therapy classes. We have weekly meditation classes, Qigong, Pilates, yoga. We have a book club where we read books that have nothing to do with breast cancer. So much is going on. So if you're looking for just connecting with other people who get it, survivingbreastcancer.org is for you. Today, we're diving into a topic that is not about running a 5K or training for a marathon, but about honoring what you can do each day to move your body and improve your health. In this podcast, we believe it's okay to break the rules and find out what works best for you. The magic number that we're focusing on today, and you may have heard before, is 150. According to medical experts, people should aim for at least 150 minutes of moderate intense exercise per week to reap significant health benefits. But what does that look like in practice? We are thrilled to speak with Briana Rickertsen today, who is joining us. She is the inspiring breast cancer survivor and founder of the Nifty 150 project. So feel free to follow her on Instagram at Nifty 150. And Briana's initiative encourages everyone to move for 150 minutes a week, making it accessible and achievable for all, regardless of fitness levels. We discuss the benefits of regular exercise, especially for those affected by breast cancer, and how small, consistent efforts can lead to big changes in your health and well-being. So whether you've been diagnosed with breast cancer, living with metastatic disease, or looking to reduce your risk of breast cancer recurrence or progression, and simply wanting to incorporate movement in your life, this episode is for you. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the conversation. All right, we are here with another episode of Breast Cancer Conversations. I am so excited to be speaking with Bri, who comes to us from Colorado, which I'm really excited about. For those of you who know or do not know, I'm based in Boston, but one of my brothers, actually two of my brothers, used to live in Colorado, and it was like my favorite place to visit. So I'm just so excited to be connecting with Bri and hear her story about her experience with breast cancer and then the amazing work that she is doing with the Nifty 150 project that we're going to dive into. And Bri and I actually have a lot of similarities in terms of being diagnosed with breast cancer in our 30s, really prioritizing health and exercise and movement in general. So I'm just really excited for today's discussion. I think there's going to be a lot of topics and key takeaways that our listeners can grasp from today's episode. So Bri, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great to get to know you a little bit more as we've been chatting leading up to this too.
So why don't you give yourself like a brief introduction, let our listeners know maybe like the age at which you were diagnosed, the type of breast cancer that you had, and then any treatments and where you are today.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed July 1st, 2020. And that was, kind of right in that beginning part of the pandemic. I was 35. And, originally my cancer was, I can't even remember what stage I was at this point. I think 2A. But it was invasive ductal carcinoma, very hormone sensitive, HER2 negative. Went through the hard-hitting chemo, our good friend the Red Devil, um, you know, Taxol, the whole works for about 5 months. I had surgeries for having a mastectomy, having axillary dissection. I also have a BRCA2 mutation, and so my ovaries have also been kicked out of here. But during my mastectomy, they actually found surprise part of one of my small tumors had HER2 positive. So that was a big surprise. So that also kicked me into more treatment. So I spent about a year and a half at the infusion center. But I was also able to get extra treatment. So I ended up getting it done via Phesgo, so Herceptin and Perjeta, but they were able to do it as an injection versus an infusion, which kind of at least helped mentally, being able to do that. And then I had radiation. As I tell people, I'm like, pretty much anything you can think of, almost everything, not everything, for treatment wise. I feel like I've done it, done it all. And so, yes, had radiation and then had, let's see, where did I go after that? I've had my final surgery and my final treatment then January 2022. So we're just over 2 years out from that.
And was
Um,
that reconstructive surgery that
it
you
was.
had, or
Yep,
okay?
it was. Yep. So that was the final surgery I had was the, kind of final reconstruction and piece of that. I started on an aromatase inhibitor in 2021. So that would have been right after radiation. And then the latest and greatest is that my latest DEXA scan last year showed significant bone deterioration. So I'm now on infusions for the bone part of it. So I'm back in the infusion center with my favorite nurses. So that's kind of the current treatment I'm on. But at this point I'm just about 4 years out of diagnosis. And so right now it's a lot of the managing of the kind of ongoing effects from that. There was this one time I'll never forget. I was in the waiting room at the infusion center with my mom, and there was, I mean, somebody who I still thought was young at the time. She was in, I think, her mid 40s, but she just stared at us and said, "Wait, you're here for treatment?" Because, of course, I had like my head wrap on. She couldn't believe that I was there for treatment, kind of not my mom. And then she warned me about estrogen. She was sitting there and she's like, "You need to know about estrogen." And I was like, "I can't even think about that right now. I just need to get through my chemo treatments before." And then now, 4 years later, I'm like, "Oh, I understand. I understand why you were warning me about estrogen and the lack of estrogen."
Yes, I feel like it's something that we don't talk a lot about. And like, I think when I even sitting with my oncologist too, they're like, okay, you're hormonal positive. We're going to decrease your estrogen levels. It'll stop and hopefully delay any like progression or recurrence. But then you don't realize like how much your body actually needs estrogen and all of the side effects that happen when you don't have estrogen circulating through your body. So we can definitely talk about that too. And so just a couple of clarifying questions. So when you had reconstruction, did you opt for like implants or did you do one of the like flap surgeries just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so I really only had one option according to my surgeon, and that was just implants. So
Okay.
no flap surgery for me. It was a tough decision, but I did decide to try reconstruction. Probably 2 weeks into my, tissue expanders being in, I did really contemplate if I should have gone flat. Um, but I also kind of, for me, I decided I wanted to try and definitely helped remind me, though, that there is no one way to do any of this. And there are so many options for that.
And then you were mentioning, the effects that the aromatase inhibitors can have on you, especially around, osteoporosis, osteopenia. And so I think understanding bone health is really important. So for those who are listening, it's always helpful to get like one of just like a baseline DEXA scan, right? To kind of see what your normal is and then monitoring that every so often, whether it's 1 year or every 2 years to kind of check on your bone health. So I too started off on an aromatase inhibitor. In fact, there's 3 different types of drugs in that class. And they all have, same but similar side effects, right? We all respond to them differently. And so I feel like I was the trifecta. I kept trying until I found one that worked, and ultimately ending up on letrozole. And then very similarly too, were you what they prescribed? Were you on Zometa now for the infusion?
I am, yes.
Okay, so yes, that's
Yep.
the same thing I was on too to kind of help strengthen the bones. And now I've been on the aromatase inhibitor for about 5 years, and now they're putting me on to tamoxifen for the remaining like 2 to 5
Okay.
years as well.
Yeah.
Again, kind of weighing the pros and cons. Bone health, there's also side effects of tamoxifen. There's also, predisposition to endometrial cancers and stomach lining, like all sorts of things. I mean, you just can't win.
Yes.
However, just trying to make the best decisions with the information we have at the time. So I feel you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's I remember during one of my chemo teach sessions, I had an amazing pharmacist. When he was going over the side effects of some of the chemos and then other treatments, and the side effect was cancer, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, Joe. Ooh, my side effect for cancer treatment is more cancer. I was like, wow, what is going on?
Oh, I know. And so you also had, it sounded like when you were giving your timeline of treatment that you had chemotherapy first, then surgery, and then more treatment after that, based
I
on what
did,
they found
correct.
with the HER2 positive. Okay.
Yep.
Very similar. We're like very, very
Yeah.
similar paths here as well. With having the what they call the neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which,
Hmm.
I think it's really interesting because when you get surgery after having neoadjuvant chemotherapy, they could really see if you've had a complete response or not to the drugs. And that really helps actually inform kind of the next steps and whether they're
Hmm.
discovering the HER2 um, trait on your tumor cells. Or in my case, I actually did not have a complete response to the treatment. So I was also given more chemotherapy after surgery as well. And so it was
Yeah.
just like this long, like, yeah, 18 months, a year and a half of just like doctor's appointments, infusions, fatigue, dealing with the trauma of a breast cancer diagnosis, just trying to get through it all. So I appreciate you sharing all of those details.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I'm an open book. I guess the one part of my treatment I didn't mention, I did also go through a flash fertility round. It was not successful, so I actually couldn't finish. It did not work, but we tried it. But that was another part that we threw in there.
And was that something that was discussed like with your doctor before starting treatment?
I will say, my health system is the University of Colorado health system. And I feel honestly really fortunate because they have so many things set up for this. So they had me connect with people in all different areas, including oncofertility, pretty much right off the bat, which is great. And when you mentioned the DEXA scans, for example, some things that I've gotten feedback on from others is that, maybe their teams, for various reasons, may not recommend a baseline. For me, everyone is different, and I do trust that your doctors know your situation, and everyone may be different, but it's also worth like, I love knowledge and having the questions to ask because for me, that was something that's just been part of it. They baseline me.
One of the things that we actually have on our website under our resources page are like questions to ask your doctors. And they are sourced questions from our community members of like the things I wish I had known or asked. Because if you haven't gone through cancer before, which we have not, like how are we supposed to know what to ask? We don't know what we don't know. And so we put together a list of questions to ask your oncologist, questions to ask your surgeon, and questions to ask your radiologist oncologist. And then we took those questions and ran them by our medical advisory board just to make sure, like, are there things that we're forgetting? Or as a doctor, like, what are things that we should be asking that we aren't? And so those have been like very successful and highly downloaded.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's such a great resource and tool to have. And it is, well, I think, I will not say the proverb correctly at all, but there's that where it's like to a hammer, everything's a nail in that realm, right? And that happens a lot during treatment. You have like you have a team. Um, I'm lucky that our team really works together, has multidisciplinary clinics and they all talk. But that being said, your radiation oncologist is focused on radiation. Your medical oncologist is focused on, your other treatment plans. Your surgeon, everyone has their own focus that is the priority for them because that's what their expertise is in. And so it is, yeah, to get that tied all together and to understand for yourself as well. I love having those questions.
So you mentioned also that you did some genetic testing to find out that you were BRCA2 positive.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about genetic testing, and then if in fact that how that has like kind of played out with like any siblings that you might have, or your family or parents or things like that. Because genetic testing is one of those things where it's like personal to you, but it also affects everyone around you because they're genes, right?
Oh yeah, it's interesting, and we definitely went on a little bit of a journey. Once again with being diagnosed young and then having the approach that UC Health does, I was introduced to a genetic counselor within those first weeks. So that was part of the plan, part of the discussion. I had a fantastic genetic counselor who talked with me on questions, really walked me through it. It was kind of for me a no-brainer to get tested, getting diagnosed with pretty aggressive cancer at 35. And, we were a little surprised. I did have one of my aunts, who I'm very close with. She's my mom's sister, and she had breast cancer a little bit older than I was when I got diagnosed, but it was really secondary cancer from treatments when she was younger, when she was a young teenager area. And so there was never concern throughout my life. Like I'd bring it up, but it was kind of like, no, that was that. So then when this came up, it was like, okay, well, actually, now we're going to look to see what that was. So we got tested and I got tested, I should say. And the genetic counselor, everyone was pretty darn certain based on history that it was going to come from my mom's side. It
Okay.
was a total surprise. We didn't find out. My mom ended up getting tested and it was not her. So we knew then that kind of came from my dad's side and was kind of buried a bit because he has all brothers.
So does my dad. Yes,
Yeah.
also buried. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So buried underneath there. But that being said, when we were kind of in that middle ground, like I've given all like, my family really talked with my like aunts and uncles, cousins as well, where it's like, here's what you need to know about me. But it's such a personal decision. So I will share my report. I will share all my information with any family member that wants it. But I also am not going to push anyone
Right.
nor
Mhm.
follow up with any. It's really like I am here, I am open, but you do what you want to do because there are absolutely people who would prefer not to know
Exactly.
about it's kind of like they're let it kind of come in its course. I am an information person. I want all the information I can. I want all the data I have. That's how I make my decisions. So it's definitely been I have had cousins on both sides get tested. I have had, family that's decided that, they do want to know more about it as well.
So I know we started off talking a little bit about, the healthy lifestyle and exercise and movement that we're both involved in. Tell me a little bit about like your exercise routine, maybe before your diagnosis and then during and now
Yeah.
post, if you will.
Yes. So I'm like a relatively healthy person. I'm married to somebody who has done triathlons for a living for a long time.
Oh
So
my gosh, really? That's
compared
so
to
cool.
him, like he's like in another world. I'm like a normal active person. That's how I say it. But movement has always been, really important. Whether it's, yoga, cycling, hiking, running, really have enjoyed everything. It's definitely a part of our lifestyle and what we do. I have a slightly dark sense of humor. There's lots of jokes around this when I got diagnosed though, but I started to laugh because I'd go to doctor's appointments and they check everything out and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're so healthy, except for the cancer." So it kind of
Right.
became like a tagline, like healthy except for the cancer, because that kind of came up often. And it also shows you that you can do you can do the
Yeah.
right things and it is what it is. So, kind of the pandemic timeframe itself, when the pandemic started in March 2020, I hopped on the Peloton bandwagon. Peloton offered free app access for like 2 months. I hopped on. My husband set my bike up on a trainer, and I was riding with friends because really couldn't see people in person. So I would join friends before work, we or after, during, like we'd kind of take. I was able to. It was like a great way to connect.
Yes.
Um, and then, kind of moving into May, mental health wise, I was using the app every day starting in May of 2020, which is also when I started to notice something was off. But using the Peloton app kind of helped me just mentally do something for myself every day, whether it was a meditation, a walk, a run, bike ride, something in that realm. Um, so when I got diagnosed, I decided that I wanted to keep that going. It was an important thing for me to take back a little bit of control when there was so much that was outside of my control. So I kind of decided I'm going to keep this going. I'm going to use the app every day. And I would ask my doctors, any surgery, any treatment, anything I had, I was like, what exercise can I do? When can I do it? Can I walk? Can I cycle? Like, what can
Yes.
I do? So it's kind of like
Mhm.
I kind of communicated with my team, and throughout communicating with my team, I also found out that a lot of my providers were familiar with either the app or they had the bike. They had something. So we could actually communicate and sometimes and talk about, oh, hey, here is a ride. Yes, you can do low impact rides. Just don't spike your heart rate or, no, you're totally good to go with it. It was a way that we could actually communicate about types of movement.
How did you manage like the fatigue or any of the other side effects going through treatment?
Yeah, so I definitely think movement played a huge part. Being the day that you have the most energy is your day that you're actually getting your chemo, right?
All the
With the cyclical
steroids. I was
nature.
like cleaning the
Yeah.
house, doing everything.
Yeah. It's like between this like cycle of it and the steroids. One of the things I did is I had a treatment day group ride. So every morning before chemo, I picked a ride, I sent it out to a group of friends, family. And people would do it either at the time with me or they do it before or after. But it was great because every chemo I had people riding with me before I went in, which was also mentally extremely helpful because, you kind of get to gear yourself up. You're like, I got to go back in. There's a lot of like this just kind of grit um, of and enduring during that time. So that was really great to have that to look forward to. So that would always be kind of the most probably intense ride I would do during treatment was kind of that day of chemo when I was feeling the best. And maybe the next couple days as the steroids were in, I could do a little bit more. And then as you move into with the chemo cycles, the ebbs and flows, I would move more towards walking. I really enjoyed, for example, on the Peloton app, they have these outdoor audio walks and runs. They're all based on the rate of perceived exertion, which during treatment, that's huge because if somebody tells you to go a certain speed, you might not necessarily need to go that certain speed, but feeling what that feels for you was great. And so, I would
Is that
move more.
similar to like, 70% effort or 35% effort, like what that percentage is for you?
Yeah, like they guided on a RP scale of 1 to 10. And so they'll say, like you had a 3 right now. So then whatever your 3 is for that day, it varies. My phone, yeah, I walked slower during chemo than I have ever. My phone actually recalibrated my steps. So it told me I was like walking a mile. And then when I actually started walking my regular route and speed, it was like 8/10 of a mile. So I thought I was going further than I was all during chemo. But I'm not taking that away from me. I was still happy with it. But it was funny because I was slower.
Yeah, I was going through chemo for the first part during winter in Boston, and I just remember like my boyfriend at the time, husband now, we would get bundled up, we would take walks. He was really supportive of like, let's get outside, let's get some fresh air. But there were days where I'm like, it took longer to like literally get bundled up and like walk a block, feel exhausted, and just be like, I just don't have it in me. We got to turn
Yeah.
back around. And it was like this like 35-minute like ordeal of just like getting ready to go out and then feeling exhausted. And then there were other days where I was like doing my 5-mile loop, no problem. And, just having that, opportunity to do more on the days that you feel well. And then having grace with yourself, just understanding like there's going to be days where you're tired and you have to honor how your body's responding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much about listening to what it needs and knowing that like it's okay to rest. It's encouraged to rest. Um, and also sometimes challenging yourself just a little bit because it is counterintuitive that, you know, one of the best ways to combat fatigue is movement, but too much movement will create fatigue. So that is a weird place to be and finding that kind of that sweet spot. It's not second nature always. So it's a little bit of like, try it, try 5 minutes. Does 5 minutes make you feel better or worse? And then, kind of gauge like if, to be able to, continue and yeah, take advantage of those days where you're feeling a little better to do a little more. I think it's a great rule of thumb.
And I'm noticing also so many oncologists now are in engaging in various like clinical trials and studies to understand the amount of energy, sorry, the amount of exercise to help those who've been diagnosed with breast
Yeah.
cancer or cancer in general, to really take a look at, what type of movement classes, what type of cardio, what type of strength training, especially for, bone health in us women. It's really great to kind of see these trials happening so that way we can get actual concrete evidence-based research on knowing
Mhm.
then what we can be doing. And so this kind of leads me into your project. I wanted to ask you, I know that your Instagram handle, the Nifty 150, is kind of how you were able to connect with us at
Yeah.
survivingbreastcancer.org. So tell me a little bit about how and when you started this. Was this something you started before your diagnosis or afterwards or during?
It was started afterwards. It was very important for me to, movement throughout. And as I kind of neared, I think it was when I probably a year in, I was, finishing radiation and I was really feeling like I would like to connect with ideally I wanted other people to have the ability to have access to the Peloton app, for example. Part of the reason I'm so fond of the Peloton app is because of the walking content. I really haven't found walking content that remotely matches that. And I just feel like walking is this very underrated tool that can be used for movement during treatment in particular. And so having kind of guided walks is honestly one of the main reasons that I really like that app, and the ability to also work out with people no matter where they're located. But walking is honestly like the key thing. So I kind of started like about a year into treatment, reaching out to Peloton directly to try to see if I could get anything, hey, could you have I asked, if they could have an oncologist on their advisory board, because they do have some various advisory boards with some medical professionals that work primarily in the cardio space or the OBGYN space. So I'd kind of started asking, here are some ideas, because honestly, I was still a little close to diagnosis that it was a lot I was like, I'm just going to try to see if someone else
Yes.
would like to do this. And after a year of kind of getting some like, hey, that's a good idea, but we're going to send it here. Hey, thanks for reaching out, or just no response at all, I just couldn't quite let go of the idea. I was like, there's something, want to kind of test it out, want to see if I can at least help support others. And so in 2023, I kicked off the Nifty 150 project, which really has a couple goals. One of the main goals is honestly just providing more awareness and ideally accessibility, to be able to first off know that movement and exercise is not only encouraged, it's now absolutely recommended, and part of the studies that have been going on absolutely recommend it, which we can talk a little bit more about. Um, Also provide some insight into how you can use Peloton. And I mean, honestly, I work in small business lending. I love small businesses. Never in a million years did I think that I would be spending time trying to like promote a corporation for free. But here I am. But it's just because I feel so strongly about the content it has that I just, want people to be able, I really want Peloton app access to be provided at diagnosis and at survivorship for at least like a year, just to be able to have that option.
And you used it, like you're the testament, right? Like this worked for you and it really helped you. So why wouldn't you want to share that message
Yeah, and
widely?
it is. And and I'm very aware that what works for one person doesn't work for everyone. Totally aware of that. I have also talked and been in touch with so many people that it has worked for as well. And it's a tool. And it's not the end all be all. And if you have something else that works for you that's not Peloton, fantastic. If this reminds you, if you see a post and you're like, oh, I do want to go for a walk today, you have your audiobook to walk to, fantastic. Like I try, all of that. It's all great and encouraged. And so one of the pieces I do with the Nifty 150 is I do recommend 150 minutes of workouts a week on the Peloton app. So that way, and I link it so people could easily access and just click on some links, add it to their Peloton app stack, and have 150 minutes should that's what they want to do. But really the goal too is just to have a little bit more of that like reminder and encouragement, um, and ultimately visibility as well within Peloton and other groups to hopefully be able to recognize this is a really big opportunity to be able to help reach cancer survivors, at diagnosis and again at survivorship. Your needs just vary throughout the time. And I get, on one hand, it seems like such a simple concept. Like there are like hundreds of studies that support exercise and movement during and after treatment. And, for me, I mean, in the simplest way, it frustrates me that like there's so much money spent on drugs, and exercise is such a component that can help with not only side effects, but it can actually help your response to the drugs. Like it's just like the benefits are numerous for it, and the cost in theory should be minimal to what's spent on the other parts of our treatment. But it is so hard to get all of these things to tie together and to work and to implement.
Amazing. I don't know if you follow Dr. Neil Iyengar. He's out
Yes, I
of
sure do.
Oh, you got okay. Yeah, he is a
Yes.
dear friend as well
Oh,
for
awesome.
survivingbreastcancer.org. And we work with him promoting some of his clinical trials, some of his scientist friends for some of the drugs that he's working on. But he's actually doing a study recently too on trying to find out what that right dose of exercise is.
Yes.
So as we talk a lot about, what is that right dose of chemotherapy? Is it always the maximum? Like if you're 250 pounds and, I'm 140, like, do I need the same amount as you do, et cetera? And so he presented not too long ago at an infinite strength conference I was attending in Connecticut, talking about the dosing, I guess, of exercise,
Mhm.
right? And so is
Yep.
it 150? Is it, what are the different dimensions? Specifically whether you're living with metastatic disease or your early stage and kind of what those goals are. So that's the study I am following quite closely, but I'm sure you have
Yeah.
other examples too.
Yeah, I've listened to him talk about that, and it's so fascinating. I mean, to be able to like agree, know, hey, this is what we want to see. We know exercise is there, but then taking it down into these levels of the types of movement,
Hmm.
the type, whether it, the intensity, the number
Yes.
of minutes. Like there are so many pieces. And once again, these are all studies, and they are so great, but everyone also is different. So just because if you would work out 148 minutes and not 150, it's okay.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
there are definitely, and there's various studies, and some of them are smaller and some of them are larger. Some of them are, meta-analysis looking at multiple studies. There's so many different things out there. And so, and you can also usually find a study to support what you want. Um, but there are absolutely studies that, are showing things, for example, on chemo response. That's another one that's funded by BCRF that they've been looking at combining both exercise and nutrition. But they
Mm,
were, that study showed that able to impact positively the response to chemo. That's crazy to me.
yeah.
I mean, in not crazy because I mean I would believe that would happen, but to be able to show that and to be able to show exercise and this dietary
Yes.
component together can really help you have a better response to chemo. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's do
Because
it.
and I'm not a scientist by any means, but I do feel like sometimes cancer gives us that like deep dive into like biology 101 and
Mhm.
understanding like metabolic health and all of the like gears that are turning in your body at the molecular level is quite phenomenal. And then how that can kind of strengthen the chemotherapy that we're receiving.
Absolutely. Which also brings me back to my monetary component. Chemo's freaking expensive. Like let's have like a $10 app option that can be covered by insurance that can then like go alongside of your chemo. Chemo's like, 10, 20, 30 plus grand per time, $10. Like I'm like, I don't know. But that's my idealistic, like simplistic view of like, oh my goodness, let's do this, please. Some of the other studies that I know, and I actually will be sharing some of the 2024 studies on the Nifty 150. I actually just did kind of put some of the highlights together for some of the studies that have come out this year. But there are some ones like that show walking, for example, and looking at the different intensity of walking. So when you don't like, for example, and this study was done for breast cancer in particular, but it was shown that if you walk at a low intensity level, that can still help your fatigue. It may need to be a little bit longer overall throughout the week, but low intensity can still get you those benefits for fatigue versus moderate or vigorous, for example. Like so looking at that, being able to really show, looking at the exercise snacks. You may have heard of that. I feel like that came highlighted this year a bit as well. But for people who maybe aren't active or able to be as active, doing 5 minutes, 2 minutes of these sort of like bursts of activity have really large impacts if that's the main thing that you're doing, for example. Um, of course, bone health is huge and, kind of tied to the cancer population that we're in, but kind of on the side of it, adjacent with our menopausal friends, like myself. And I'm 39, menopause at 36, I think. But I've been learning so much about the menopause piece and trying to understand those studies there. It's tougher in that space a bit when you're looking at menopause and then also cancer survivors with menopause. Like there's, you know, you kind of have to take a little bit of it both. And I'm not a doctor. But I think, there's maybe more that can be done in that space, but really looking at that part of it and the strength that's recommended. It's actually recommended that you do strength 3 times a week, which seems so daunting if you do not do strength regularly. Um, and that's, one of my goals. And I know from my small space, but hopefully, impactful is like just to help people just even get started with like 5 minutes of strength 1 time a week because it's starting in these increments. It's finding things you enjoy to keep you going, because if you start with something and it's not your thing, it it doesn't it's going to be harder to stick. But when you can really, like, it's taken me 4 years, but I now love strength and prioritize strength. but I had to start low. I had to start slow. I had to find the types of classes that, I was comfortable with. Um, and now I love it. Like now I'm like, I would never have done a 45-minute strength class in the past. That'd be so daunting to me. And now they're one of my favorites to do.
And do you do those through the Peloton app?
I do.
You do? Okay, awesome.
Yep.
I'll have to look
Yeah.
into that. So I also fell into the COVID Peloton trend. I got the Peloton and I got a golden retriever. I got a puppy
Oh,
because I
great.
was like, it's COVID. This is my rainy day
Yep.
fund and we're spending it. Um, so I love and I agree that like it's just been nice to have something that you can do it in the comfort of your own home and that they
Mhm.
have different time lengths, right? So like if I only have 5 minutes to do
Mm,
something, you can sort by duration and choose something that's shorter or longer depending on how much time you have. So when you're talking about strength, just to clarify,
yeah.
like strength training, is that still part of the 150? Like the 150 could be cardio or strength training, or
Yes.
is it separate?
So how I approach it, and keep in mind, like it's not like the scientific exact way, but when I look at 150, I do include strength classes within the 150 minutes. Part of the reason for that is the recommendation for survivors during treatment, after treatment, is 150 minutes plus of moderate activity or 75 minutes plus of vigorous activity. So when I'm recommending 150 minutes a week in the classes, it's kind of a mix of classes. So there's going to be some maybe hit classes, runs, walks. If it's a run, you can always walk it. If it's a walk, you can run it. There's no rules. But usually, within that 150 minutes that I'm recommending, I do make a general assumption that some of that is actually done at a vigorous activity. And because it is important to try to start to move towards 2 times of strength a week, I always include at least 2 strength classes um, within that 150. So
That's great. Thank you for that explanation. And did you mention also during your treatment that you had auxiliary node dissection?
I sure did.
You sure did. So can you talk
Mhm.
to me a little bit about how that plays into some of the strength training? Because again,
Yeah.
because the more I'm talking with you, I realize that we're more like cancer twins too. I also had
Yeah.
that type
Hey,
of surgery and
twinsies.
have developed lymphedema as something that, I feel like we were either managing to prevent or you get and you continue to manage. So either way, you're managing potential lymphedema. And so I know that's
Absolutely.
something that I've been like wearing specific compression sleeves, seeing a lymphatic therapist for lymphatic massage draining, etc. And I want to also kind of demystify the idea of like, oh, I'm scared to lift weights or I'm scared to do something because it might trigger or flare up my lymphedema. Whereas there are very safe and effective ways of still being able to incorporate that.
Oh
So
my
have you
gosh.
noticed like how has that impacted your life?
Yeah, so I'm looking around because I'm actually trying to see if I can reach my lymphedema sleep. It's sitting on the Peloton, but I can't reach it. It's like right to my left of my desk. Um, so lymphedema scared the crap out of me when I first learned about it. But all the examples that were given were like, you can't wash 100 dishes at church. And I was like, what a interesting example. Um, Now I did use it to my advantage when I didn't want to weed initially, like weed the garden. I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, lymphedema. I can't weed. That's a repetitive motion. Nope, can't do that." So I tried to get away from that for a while. But I had, great physical therapist focused in lymphedema. She fitted me for a sleeve, went through physical therapy multiple times throughout treatment because of these various surgeries, radiation, and other pieces. And so, we really, paid attention to it. Now, technically, she diagnosed me with stage 0. Um, and I have like a machine that does like kind of that lymphatic, it looks
Oh,
like an
okay.
elephant trunk.
Yes.
Yes. So I do have one of those machines. I don't use it as much as I should. But it's at my house. And what I do is find the best ways to use my sleeve. So I do use my sleeve for more intense workouts, for lifting. I personally use it for long haul flights, but it is all based on my conversations with my situation and my physical therapist there. And when it comes to weightlifting, there are definitely studies that are out there that show it is safe. It is safe to do, and it's really now, anyone who listens to this, talk to your physical therapist, talk to your doctor. Do not listen to me, but you can listen to the questions I have. Um, when you progress slow and you're working on that way, that you can definitely work up, and there should be no limits to what you do as you're working up. Now, when you take a break or you have another surgery or anything happens, you do need to back off and start again. You might not need to go down to the beginning, but there are rules of thumb. And there are many people may be familiar with Helen Bealey. She's a physical therapist based out of Australia that shared a lot about strength training over the last 4 years or so. Helen has taken a break from social media for the time being, but she has so many good resources, and I share those as well on some of the lymphedema in particular because she is a physical therapist that is aware in these areas. But I find it really interesting to be able to kind of know the general rules. You kind of start low, progress, and then when you do take a break, you do have to come back a little bit, progress again. um and that's been, I kind of thought maybe I'll never do a push-up again, which I honestly didn't mind because I do not like push-ups. And those are still really tough for me to do. But weightlifting, it's like, I am at the point where I am buying new dumbbells every 2 or 3 months right now, which is really exciting to be able to, I'm not, people say like that you should lift heavy. Heavy means different things to different people. You build up. My heavy is different than other people's heavy right now, but it is heavier than I've ever lifted.
Very interestingly, and people who listen to my podcast may know this about me already, but I used to be an avid yogi before my diagnosis. And I was also a strict vegan before my diagnosis. So as you were saying, like, kind of that, oh, you're super healthy except for the cancer. I was like, people are like, oh, like you should eat more mushrooms or more cow. I was like, I was a freaking vegan and I still got cancer. So it doesn't actually matter, And since then I follow more of a pescatarian diet now. But I also used to do yoga all the time. And after my diagnosis, yoga became incredibly triggering for me. I couldn't do the chaturanga push-ups anymore. I was so stiff in my upper body. I lost, it was very angering for me, especially in some of these yoga classes where everyone's wearing cute little Lululemon bralettes and everything. And I'm going through breast surgery, not looking cute. So it was very hard for me. But I'm very excited to share that I just started going back to yoga last week. And I
Congratulations.
thank you. And Megan, who you were conversing with earlier on our team, did her yoga teacher training. So she's also very proud of me as well. But it's one of those things where it's it's okay to find different activities after a diagnosis, right? And so during this time, I picked up tennis just to try a new activity. I was never a tennis player, but why not take a private lesson here and there or play with some friends, just hitting the ball back and forth. Getting into swimming because I know that even though it's a repetitive motion, that resistance of the water really helped kind of
Yeah.
move and pump the lymphedema and lymphatic
Mhm.
fluid in your arms as well. So trying to find other activities. So it's not all or nothing.
Yes.
But then I'm also very excited to kind of get back into yoga and remind myself how much I loved and enjoyed and appreciated that type of practice.
And it's harder to do than you think sometimes, but you don't have to follow the rules. You don't have to, if somebody tells you to do a chaturanga, you do not have to do a chaturanga. Now, if you want to and you're not able to, that can be really frustrating, and I understand that. But it's also okay if somebody tells you to do a motion. Like, it's okay to not do it. It's okay to do things body weight. Um, it is one thing I will mention about the app that I have enjoyed too is for strength. For example, you can search by you can see the class breakdown, so it'll tell you what is being done. So if you look at the class and you see there's a whole bunch of push-ups and that's not what you can do, don't do that class. You can see other classes and you can tell the movements and the plan, and that can also help maybe set you up to prepare for, oh, I can do those motions.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, kind of just chatting about exercise in general and overlaying that with a cancer diagnosis. So I appreciate your personal experience, your knowledge, the research and studies that you're sharing through your Instagram account. So people can find you at the Nifty 150 on Instagram. Is
Yeah,
that the best place to connect with you on?
that's the best place.
Any final thoughts or nuggets that we haven't talked about yet that you want to share with our listeners, or what's next in your world of exercise and survivorship?
Honestly, just enjoying that movement, and hopefully helping to be an encouragement to others. And I think we touched on this, but I think maybe one of the final thoughts I'll leave is just that, there, I say it but I really do mean it. Like, there are no rules, you know, you have these studies and it's great support for what we do, but also like you don't have to follow a box. It's really finding what is enjoyment for you, what you can do. Like, what you can do today may not be what you're able to do in a month. That's okay. Or the person next to you. Like, it's just, there are so many right ways to do something. And it's just finding what is the best for you, and ideally the best you can, not comparing yourself to anyone else.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like that's giving us and all of our listeners like permission to like not follow the rules, to modify, to find something that works for us. And sometimes we just need to hear someone say it's okay to break the rules. It's okay to be like, don't compare yourself to the person next to you, et cetera. So thank you for sharing that. What is it that we can do to find joy in our world?
Mm-hmm.
And so finding those nuggets of joy, those moments, I find it very hard. I am like a workaholic. I work all the time, but like, I have these like quote unquote like mini vacations. I'm like, maybe it's just 20 minutes where I'm on vacation mentally, because, I just need these times to
Yeah.
regroup. And then lastly is, it's not that I have to work out, but that I get to work out, that I get to move
Yeah.
my body, that I get to go outside in nature, that I get to walk around the block. And so kind of reframing how we approach these activities.
Yeah. I love it. I think that's great.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story, be a guest on Breast Cancer Conversations. And I hope we can continue the conversation. I'd love to have you back and keep us posted on all of the studies that you are following.
Absolutely. So great to talk with you today. And I love everything that you're doing and how you're supporting so many survivors out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast are from personal experiences and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always contact your medical care team. If you're looking for specific topics or would like to be a guest on our show, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is laura@survivingbreastcancer.org. Until next time, keep on thriving.